Hello, and so I'm going to go over what we did in discussion on Tuesday, January 11th. And first off, I'm going to discuss the just a couple announcements here. So, as there was a lot of questions rather during the Monday lecture about what is going to be on the exam, I just want to remind everyone that Dr. Rankin will be mentioning the information that you need to know for exams often more than one time during lecture, and will also be pointing out topics that are important during lecture as well. So these will, of course, have a greater likelihood of being on the exam. And don't forget, we'll also be doing a review session during the discussion right before your exams. So bring your questions about the lecture content to that discussion section so we can go over any questions you have. And also remember that there are lecture note outlines on Canvas. And this is a really great way for you to know what Dr. Rankin is looking for you to take away from the lectures. So not every instructor provides those. So definitely take advantage of that resource that's available for you on Canvas. And if you are still struggling with taking notes, you can use the resources as well through the Academic Resource Center. I will be sending out some more information about that as well. So just keep an eye out for your announcements on Canvas, and you should also be getting an email when I send out announcements on Canvas. And as we are getting behind in the lecture, please keep in mind that we want to keep the chat on topic as much as possible. And we are also going to ask you to raise your hand before unmuting during lectures so that we can stay on topic and Dr. Rankin can handle any questions as they come after covering a certain amount of the lecture. And so just write down your questions if you want to ask them in person, but you can also put them in the chat as Sally and I will be keeping an eye on the chat and trying to answer questions there. And if there's something that we feel should be announced, we will let Dr. Rankin know as well. And just as a reminder, to also keep in mind that the syllabus is not something you should be reading at the start of the course. It's a document you want to reference throughout the quarter because all of your due dates are on there, the topic content for the lectures, and also the activities for the discussions coming up. And also what percentages of your grade certain assignments are. So if you have questions, definitely keep in mind that you can check out the syllabus as well. And so I'm going to start by reviewing mouth parts and then go on to discuss eyes briefly and then end discussing legs of insects for this discussion about insect anatomy. And I will do this briefly. This is also being covered in lecture, but you will need this information to complete the worksheet that is due for this discussion. And sorry, I had some technical issues there. And the PowerPoint that is actually saved as a PDF here is available in Canvas under the announcement that I sent out to remind you about the discussion happening on Tuesday with the Zoom link. Attached to that announcement in Canvas is the PDF that I am using here, and you can use this to help you complete the worksheet. So we are reviewing the main like basic mouth parts, which are present here on the grasshopper. And we used or Dr. Rankin used a diagram that was drawn in lecture, but here you can see what it looks like on the actual insect. And this is a better photo underneath here, so you can see that the mandibles are kind of tucked away in there. The labium and maxilla and the labrum and the clypeus up on the top, like the upper lip, and then the others down here and the maxilla here. And just remember that they're off the maxillaries for holding and positioning food. The upper lip area is used to position food, keep it from falling out, and the same with this lower area as well, while the mandibles are used for chewing. Grasshoppers are an herbivore with chewing parts. There are several types of insects with chewing mouth parts, and grasshoppers have hypognathous chewing parts, which means they're located on the ventral side of the body, which means this underside, and that is because they are herbivores chewing plant tissue and matter, which is often located below them. And you can contrast that with the tiger beetle, which is a predator with chewing mouth parts as well. However, they're positioned quite differently, as you can see here, kind of sticking out from the head. And when that is the case, when the mouth parts are sticking straight out instead of being underneath the insect, they're called prognathous mouth parts. And there are several reasons for this, of course, as a predator is going to be capturing and eating prey. They have these larger mandibles that are protruding from their head, so they can use those in that process. And then piercing, sucking mouth parts are highly modified from the basic type of mouth parts, and they're used to stab through solid tissue and suck up the liquid that is inside of the organism that they're stabbing through. And they are found in all members of the order of Hemiptera, which are true bugs, cicadas, and aphids. And that is different from the order of Hymenoptera. I had that question a couple times, so just remember Hemiptera are true bugs, cicadas, aphids, and other insects, while Hymenoptera are bees, ants, and wasps. And here's a wonderful close-up of what that looks like, the piercing, sucking mouth parts on a cicada, also located on the ventral side, like the grasshopper's mouth parts, so they're hypognathous, and they're getting into that plant material, which is located underneath of them typically. And these guys are the ones that are using their piercing and sucking mouth parts to get through plant tissue can be a big problem for agriculture. However, like the chewing mouth parts, there are also predators with piercing and sucking mouth parts, as you can see here. This assassin bug, which is a blood feeder and can transmit Chagas disease to humans, they also have a piercing, sucking mouth part, but you can see that it is situated differently, just like the grasshopper and the tiger beetle, and it is used much differently as well. And I pointed this out in the lecture that, well, these are predators and can pierce and with their piercing and sucking mouth parts transmit diseases to the organisms that they are feeding on. It is also important to remember that the herbivores also can pass on diseases as well to plants, like viruses, bacteria, and other types of things that aren't good for plants, like fungi. And so next we have sponging and lapping mouth parts, which are commonly seen in dipteran organisms, which are flies. There are other types of mouth parts in flies. They are highly diverse, but the most common you'll see is the sponging and lapping mouth parts. And these are highly modified from the typical type of mouth parts, and they're used to sponge up liquid. So this flesh fly has sponging and lapping mouth parts, as you can see here. The sponge type part kind of comes off of this appendage, and so they are consuming liquid that is already on a surface. And it's a lot like the sponge that you might use to scrub your dishes, but instead they're just soaking it up and then using that appendage to feed on it. And I discussed another example in um, the discussion section on Tuesday of the horsefly or greenheads, which I don't know if they have them around here, but from where I'm from, these are flies that bite you and then use their sponging lapping mouth parts to suck up liquid that comes out of the wound, and it's quite painful. And they have other mouth parts that are very sharp that are used for biting, and then they also have this sponging and lapping mouth part. And then for nectar feeding mouth parts, we find them in the order of Lepidoptera in addition to another order which I'll talk about later, but lepidopteran insects include butterflies and moths. And they have a very highly modified mouth part as well, which has turned into a long straw or a siphon-like, and that is called a proboscis. And when they're not using it, it's curled up kind of like a hose when it's not in use. And you can see that in this next photo here. They have a very long mouth part, but they've got it nice and curled up and tucked away here. But then when they are using it, they extend that out and can use it like a straw to get deep and down into flowers to get the nectar out. They also use them for eating other substances like water. And I discussed in the discussion, just as an added bonus, you don't need to know this for the test or anything, but there are also some butterflies and moths in like the rainforest that will feed on other liquids like urine of other organisms because it has some trace nutrients that are hard to find in the rainforest, and so they're able to exploit that resource with their proboscis as well. And then we also have other modified nectar feeding mouthparts which are found in bees. They still have their mandibles, unlike the Lepidopteran insects, which have lost their mandibles, but they have the bees have retained those, and they're highly modified into something that is a lot like a tongue, which is called a glossa. And so you can see that here they still have their mandibles present, but then the glossa is another very long mouth part, and it has these hair type things on the end, and that increases the surface area so that they can get down into flowers and have the liquid stick to that glossa part and then feed on it. And then thrips have asymmetrical mouth parts, which you can see here, which is all you're going to need to know about thrips. So we're going to move on to the eyes. So here's an example of ocelli, which are these simple eyes present on this paper wasp. So adult insects will have these. And these are mostly used for light reception. And this helps the insect do things like tell what time of day it is and how long the day length is. So this is a way that they can understand what season it is by having the amount of daylight perceived through these ocelli, which are very simple eyes because they only have one lens per ocelli. And they also can use these to help them fly, and you will often see them in a set of three, and they use them to help them fly through perceiving light as well as they can look at the horizon to help orient themselves in space when they're flying. And as we discussed, all insects must have compound eyes, and compound eyes, as they suggest, are very complex, as the name suggests. So every single one of these dots has its own lens, and every single one of these dots is a single ommatidium, or when we talk about several of them, we call them ommatidia. And these are very interesting because they can help the insect in many ways, of course. As you can see, these dragonflies' eyes are very large, and it gives them, and curves, so it gives them a very almost 360-degree view of the world around them. And then cursorial legs. We're moving on to leg parts, different types of legs. So you'll need to remember the names of these types of legs, and I will give you some hints on how to try to remember them. So for running, cursorial legs are used for running. They're typically very long and thin, and they often have rows of spines facing only in one direction, which you will see here on these cockroach legs. So these spines are going backward here, and they have long, thin legs. And as we know, they're very good runners and they're very fast. And here's another example of these very extremely long legs on this beautiful tiger beetle, which is also an excellent running insect. And next, we'll discuss saltatorial legs, which are specialized for jumping. They're very long and they have a swollen femur. So that is like the upper part of their hind leg, and it's swollen because it is full of muscle, which helps them jump. And one way to remember the name saltatorial, if you know any Spanish, they have a similar Latin root. So saltar means to jump in Spanish. So that may help you remember this. And you can see that grasshoppers have saltatorial legs, and this very large swollen femur here is the area of the leg with all that muscle. And next we'll discuss raptorial legs. So one way to try to remember this is like a raptor, a type of bird that is a predator. Um, like hawks are types of raptors, and they of course grab prey with their legs. So similarly, raptorial legs in insects are used for grasping prey. They're usually have these spines that are thick or hooks that help them hang on to prey, and they're often in front of the insect. And this is an example of raptorial forelegs on this mantis, this orchid mantis. But one way to think about it as well is that we call a praying mantis because they're holding their forelegs in front of them. So that goes along with this last bullet point here. And there you can see these spines and hooks as well. And a giant water bug. These are such cool insects. You can see their raptorial legs and that they are highly specialized for catching prey and that they're very good at it because they're catching extremely large prey like this frog here. And fossorial legs are used for digging. They're short, thick types of legs, and the tibia, that like front part of the foreleg in the next insect we're going to talk about, is often short and thick to help them with digging, and they usually have these thicker spines or claws to help them with digging as well. And one way to try to remember this is that fossils are usually underground and you have to dig for them. So this kind of sounds like fossils, so fossorial legs help with digging. And here is the mole cricket with those large claws and large tibia. And these are, of course, very highly specialized for digging. And it's probably one reason we don't see these insects out in the world. I've never seen one in the wild because they're often underground, right? Because they're excellent diggers. And then natatorial legs are used for swimming. They're often flattened and similar to paddles or like flipper types of legs, and they often have hairs on them, which help them to get more surface tension, have more surface area so they can paddle through the water better. And a good way to try to remember this one as well with Spanish, it has a similar Latin root, nadar, means to swim in Spanish, so that is somewhat similar here to natatorial legs. And giant water bugs also have natatorial legs in addition to their forelegs, which are raptorial. Their hind legs are natatorial, and that's because they, as their name suggests, they live in the water. They're aquatic insects. So you can see that they have these flatter hind legs that they kind of use like a frog would to swim, and that's similar to these water scavenger beetles as well. And then clinging legs are types of legs that you will see on lice, and their legs are highly specialized to grasp onto only certain types of hair, which is why you will see that certain species, so that's they're modified to grasp onto only one type of hair for their host. So different species of these lice will have different types of ends that will only grab onto that type of hair. So if it's thick or the shape of it, they're highly specialized to their host only. And that is something that helps cause speciation in this type of insect. All right, and that is it. If you have any questions, please email me and let me know, or come to my office hours on Fridays from noon to 3.